My daughter sued me for everything. In court, until I said 3 words that made her lawyer turn pale. I stood outside courtroom 4A in the Dallas County Courthouse, watching my daughter Victoria adjust her designer blazer through the glass window. She was 34 now, with the same determined chin her mother had, but there was something cold in her eyes that hadn't been there when I taught her how to change oil on the rigs 15 years ago. My name's Ben Parker. I'm 59 years old, and I never thought I'd be standing here watching my own flesh and blood try to destroy me. Her lawyer, Charles Thompson, leaned in close to whisper something, and Victoria actually smiled. Not the warm smile I remembered from when she was little, but something calculating. Something that reminded me of the corporate sharks I'd dealt with in the oil business for 30 years. My own lawyer, Amanda Rodriguez, touched my elbow. "Mr. Parker, you ready for this?" I nodded, feeling the weight of the manila envelope in my jacket pocket. The envelope that contained everything I needed to end this charade. I'd been planning this moment for 8 months, ever since I discovered what my princess had really been up to. "Let's get this over with," I said. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Wood paneling, fluorescent lights, and maybe 40 empty seats. Victoria had already taken her spot at the plaintiff's table, wearing a $2,000 suit that probably cost more than what I paid my best roughnecks for 2 weeks' work. Charles sat beside her, shuffling papers with the kind of theatrical precision designed to intimidate. Guy looked like he charged $500 an hour just to breathe. His whole setup screamed big money lawyer, the kind who could make black look white if you paid him enough. I took my seat next to Amanda and caught Victoria staring at me. When our eyes met, she didn't look away. Instead, she gave me that pitying look she'd been wearing for months. Poor old Dad doesn't understand what's happening to him. That look used to make me doubt myself. Not anymore. The bailiff called us to order, and Judge Patricia Anderson entered. She was a woman in her early 60s with steel-gray hair and the no-nonsense expression that comes from 25 years of hearing people lie in her courtroom. I'd done my homework on her. Tough but fair, didn't like games. "We're here regarding the petition filed by Victoria Parker Miller," she began, looking over her reading glasses. "Mrs. Miller seeks to have her father, Benjamin Parker, declared mentally incompetent, and to gain conservatorship over his assets and business holdings. Is that correct?" Charles stood up, buttoning his suit jacket with practiced flair. "Yes, Your Honor. This is a difficult matter for the family, but we believe it's necessary for Mr. Parker's protection and well-being." Protection. That's what she was calling it. Protecting me right into a nursing home while she sold off everything I'd built. "Mr. Parker," the judge looked directly at me. "You understand the nature of these proceedings?" "I do, Your Honor." My voice was steady. 59 years old, Vietnam vet, built an $18 million company from a single truck and a toolbox. I could still project authority when I needed to. "Very well. Mr. Thompson, you may call your first witness." Charles smiled like a man who thought he'd already won. "The petitioner calls Dr. Timothy Wells." I watched a man in his 50s take the stand. Expensive suit, soft hands, the look of someone who'd never done a day of real work in his life. Dr. Wells was a psychiatrist, and Victoria had brought me to see him 4 months ago. She'd claimed it was just a routine checkup after some dizzy spells I'd had from working long hours in the heat. Said she was worried about her old man. I thought it was sweet that she cared. Shows how much I knew. I remember thinking it was strange that she insisted on being in the room during the appointment, but I figured my little girl was just worried about losing another parent after her mother died 3 years back. Now I understood what had really been happening. She wasn't protecting me. She was building a case against me. Dr. Wells took the oath and settled into his seat like he owned the place. "Dr. Wells," Charles began, pacing in front of the witness stand like he was performing for an audience. You examined Benjamin Parker on August 20th of this year. Can you tell the court what you found? Wells opened his folder with theatrical precision. I conducted a comprehensive cognitive assessment. Mr. Parker showed concerning signs of memory impairment, difficulty with complex decision-making, and some confusion regarding recent business events. Amanda tensed beside me. This was exactly what we'd expected, but hearing it said out loud still stung. Even when you know someone's lying about you, it hits different when they do it under oath. In your professional opinion, Charles continued, is Mr. Parker currently capable of managing a multi-million-dollar oil services company and making sound financial decisions? Wells hesitated just long enough for me to notice. Just long enough to make me wonder if maybe he had a conscience buried somewhere under all that expensive education. Based on my examination, he said finally, I have significant concerns about his capacity to handle complex business matters without supervision. Thank you, Doctor. Charles turned back toward his table with that satisfied smile. No further questions. Judge Anderson looked at Amanda. Cross-examination? Amanda stood up. She was young, maybe 36, but sharp as a drilling bit. I'd hired her because she reminded me of myself when I was starting out. Hungry, smart, and ready to fight for what was right. Dr. Wells, she began, how long was your examination of Mr. Parker? Approximately 50 minutes. And during that entire time, Mr. Parker's daughter was present in the room? Yes, she was. Did you find that unusual? A 59-year-old successful businessman needing his daughter present for what was supposed to be a private medical examination? Wells shifted slightly in his chair. The daughter requested to be present. She expressed concern about her father's condition. I see. Did Mr. Parker himself request that she be there? I don't recall him specifically asking for that. Amanda let that hang in the air for a moment, and I could see a few people in the gallery starting to pay closer attention. These signs of confusion you mentioned, can you give the court specific examples? Wells flipped through his notes. He couldn't recall the exact dates of recent business meetings. He seemed uncertain about specific financial transactions that had occurred in the previous weeks. I see. Did you independently verify whether these meetings actually took place, or did you simply accept that Mr. Parker should have remembered them perfectly? I based my assessment on standard clinical protocols, and Dr. Wells, yes or no, did you verify the accuracy of the information you were testing him on? Another pause. No. I relied on the background information provided. Background information provided by whom? By the family. By Victoria Parker Miller specifically? Yes. Amanda nodded slowly. No further questions. As Dr. Wells stepped down, I could see Charles regrouping at his table. The cross-examination hadn't gone exactly the way he'd planned, but he wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. The petitioner calls Harold Morrison, Charles announced. A thin man in his 40s walked up to the stand. I recognized him. He was the CPA who'd been doing some contract work for us. What I didn't know was why he was here testifying against me. Mr. Morrison, Charles began, you've been reviewing the financial records of Parker Oil Services. Can you tell the court what you found? Morrison cleared his throat nervously. I discovered several irregularities in the company accounts. Unusual transfers, contracts signed without proper documentation, payments to vendors that couldn't be verified. I felt my jaw clench. Those transfers were legitimate business expenses, and every contract had been properly vetted. This guy was either incompetent or he'd been fed false information. In your professional opinion, do these irregularities suggest someone who's losing their capacity to manage financial affairs? Based on what I reviewed, yes. The pattern suggests confused or impaired decision-making. Charles nodded gravely. Thank you. No further questions. Amanda stood for cross-examination, and I could tell she was ready for this one. Mr. Morrison, who hired you to review Mr. Parker's accounts. Victoria Parker Miller contacted me. And she provided you with the records you reviewed? Yes. Did you independently verify the legitimacy of the vendors and contracts you questioned? Morrison shifted uncomfortably. I worked with the information provided to me. So you didn't actually investigate whether these were legitimate business expenses. That wasn't part of my scope of work. Amanda picked up a folder. Mr. Morrison, if I showed you documentation proving that every single transaction you questioned was actually legitimate business, would that change your assessment? Charles jumped up. Objection. Counsel is making statements not in evidence. Sustained, Judge Anderson said. But I saw her lean forward with interest. No further questions, Amanda said, but her point was made. Next up was Jerry Phillips, a guy who used to work for me about 2 years ago. I'd had to let him go for showing up drunk to job sites, so I wasn't surprised he had an axe to grind. Mr. Phillips, Charles said, you worked for Parker Oil Services for how long? About 18 months. And during that time, did you observe any concerning behavior from Mr. Parker? Jerry straightened up, enjoying his moment in the spotlight. Oh yeah, he'd forget things we'd talked about the day before. Sometimes he'd give contradictory instructions to different crews. Near the end, he seemed confused about basic job site procedures he'd been doing for 30 years. I wanted to stand up and call him a liar right there. This was the same Jerry who'd shown up to work 3 sheets to the wind and nearly killed someone operating heavy machinery. But I kept my mouth shut and let Amanda handle it. Mr. Phillips, Amanda began her cross-examination. You were terminated from Parker Oil Services, weren't you? Yeah, but for safety violations related to alcohol consumption on the job site. Jerry's face flushed. That was blown out of proportion. Blown out of proportion? You operated a crane while intoxicated and nearly injured 3 workers. I wasn't that drunk. I see. And this testimony today, does it have anything to do with the wrongful termination lawsuit you filed against Mr. Parker? The one that was dismissed? Charles started to object, but Jerry was already digging his own grave. Look, Parker screwed me over. Maybe I had a drink or 2, but that don't mean— Thank you, Mr. Phillips. No further questions. But Charles wasn't done yet. His next witness was the one I'd been dreading most. The petitioner calls Anthony Miller. My son-in-law walked up to the stand like he owned the place. Anthony was 36, Stanford MBA, one of those tech guys who thought he was smarter than everyone else. Problem was, he'd burned through most of Victoria's trust fund on failed startups and now needed access to the real money. He took the oath with the kind of smooth confidence that made me want to punch something. Mr. Miller, Charles began, you're married to Victoria Parker Miller? Yes, for 6 years. And you've had numerous opportunities to observe Benjamin Parker's behavior in family settings? Unfortunately, yes. That stung. This kid had been to my house for Christmas, Thanksgiving, birthday parties. I'd treated him like the son I never had, and now he was sitting there talking about me like I was some burden. Can you describe some instances that concerned you? Anthony leaned forward, putting on his concerned family member act. It started small. Last Thanksgiving, he forgot several family members' names, people he'd known for years. At Christmas, he gave my daughter Emily the same present twice, like he didn't remember he'd already given her one. I remembered that Christmas. Emily had mentioned she wanted art supplies, so I got her a set. Then later, I found an even better set and got that too. It wasn't confusion. It was being a grandfather who wanted to spoil his granddaughter. But in Anthony's version, I was some doddering old fool. And in terms of business decisions? Charles prompted. That's where it got really scary, Anthony continued. Victoria would come home devastated because her father had made major decisions without consulting anyone. Contracts signed with companies nobody had heard of. Money transferred to accounts Victoria didn't recognize. When she'd ask about it, he'd get defensive, angry, start accusing her of trying to steal from him. Must have been very difficult for your family. It was heartbreaking. We love Ben, but we couldn't just stand by and watch him destroy everything he'd built. Love. This from a guy who'd been pushing Victoria to pressure me into selling the company for months. Amanda's cross-examination was surgical. Mr. Miller, your current business venture. How's that going? Anthony's smooth demeanor cracked slightly. We're between funding rounds. Between funding rounds. That's one way to put it. Isn't it true that your tech startup is currently $300,000 in debt? We've had some challenges. $300,000 in debt, yes or no? Yes, but... And if your wife gains control of Parker Oil Services, that would solve your financial problems, wouldn't it? Anthony's jaw tightened. This isn't about money. I didn't ask what it was about. I asked if you'd benefit financially from your father-in-law being declared incompetent. Eventually, we might... Yes or no, Mr. Miller? Yes. Amanda let that hang in the air. One more question. Didn't you approach Mr. Parker 7 months ago with a proposal to sell Parker Oil Services to Titan Energy Group? I presented some options for the family to consider. Options that would have netted you personally how much money? Charles objected, but the damage was done. Everyone in that courtroom could see exactly what was happening here. No further questions, Amanda said. I watched Anthony walk back to his seat, and for the first time since this whole thing started, I saw doubt creep into Victoria's eyes. Maybe she was starting to realize the kind of man she'd married. Maybe she was seeing how this looked to everyone else. But Charles Thompson wasn't finished yet. He had one more witness, and this one was going to hurt the most. The petitioner calls Victoria Parker Miller to the stand. My daughter stood up, smoothed down her skirt, and walked to the witness stand. She looked confident, composed, every inch the successful businesswoman. But I knew her tells, the way she pressed her lips together when she was nervous, how her left hand twisted her wedding ring when she was lying. She was doing both right now. She placed her hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. I found myself wondering when she'd forgotten what that meant. Victoria, Charles began, using her first name to establish that familiar, sympathetic tone. I know this is difficult for you. Can you tell the court about your relationship with your father? Victoria took a breath, and when she spoke, I could hear the practiced emotion in her voice. He was my hero growing up. My dad built Parker Oil from absolutely nothing. He taught me about the business, about working hard, about treating people fairly. I always thought someday I'd help run the company alongside him. She looked directly at me when she said it, and for just a moment, I saw a flash of the little girl who used to ride around job sites with me in my pickup truck. When did that change? Charles prompted gently. About a year ago, I started noticing things. Victoria's voice got stronger as she warmed up to her story. Small things at first. He'd forget meetings we'd scheduled, or show up at the wrong time. He'd make decisions that didn't make sense for the business. Can you give specific examples? Charles prompted. He signed a contract with a drilling company called Southwest Services that nobody in the industry had ever heard of. When I asked him about it, he couldn't explain why he'd chosen them over our usual contractors. Then there was the $200,000 transfer. Here it comes, I thought. The big lie. He moved $200,000 from our operating account to some vendor in Houston. When I asked about it, he got angry, told me it was none of my business, said I was trying to undermine him. Victoria's voice cracked. Slightly. It broke my heart. My own father was accusing me of trying to steal from him. How did this affect your ability to work together? It became impossible. He started changing passwords, locking me out of accounts I'd had access to for years. He'd make major decisions without telling anyone, then get furious when I asked questions. Our employees started coming to me because they were confused by contradictory instructions. Victoria looked directly at me again. I love my father, but I couldn't just watch him destroy everything he spent 30 years building, and I couldn't let him put our 40 employees' jobs at risk because he wasn't capable of running the company anymore. What convinced you that legal action was necessary? 3 months ago, I found out he'd been in discussions with some environmental cleanup company about a contract that would have put us in violation of EPA regulations. When I confronted him, he didn't even understand why I was concerned. That's when I knew we had to do something. Charles nodded sympathetically. Why do you believe you should be granted conservatorship? Because I've been working at Parker Oil for 12 years. I know every aspect of the business. I have an MBA from Rice University. And because someone needs to protect my father from making decisions that could destroy not just the company, but potentially land him in legal trouble. Thank you, Victoria. No further questions. Judge Anderson looked at Amanda. Cross-examination? Amanda stood up, and I saw something shift in Victoria's expression. She'd been confident with Charles asking softball questions, but now she looked nervous. Mrs. Miller, Amanda began, you mentioned you've been handling day-to-day operations for the company. For how long? The past 6 months or so. And during that time, has the company's profitability increased or decreased? Victoria hesitated. There have been some market challenges in the energy sector. I didn't ask about market challenges. Has profitability increased or decreased? It's decreased somewhat. Amanda picked up a document. According to the company's quarterly reports, profitability has decreased by 22% since you took over daily operations. Is that accurate? Like I said, market conditions have been difficult. Yes or no, Mrs. Miller? 22% decrease? Victoria's jaw tightened. Yes. Now, you mentioned a $200,000 transfer to a vendor your father wouldn't explain. Did you investigate which vendor that was? He refused to tell me. Did you look into the company records yourself? Check the invoices, the work orders? He'd changed the passwords to those systems. Or did he restrict your access because he'd discovered discrepancies in the accounts that concerned him? Charles started to object, but Amanda moved on quickly. Mrs. Miller, isn't it true that you approached your father 7 months ago with a proposal to sell Parker Oil Services to Titan Energy Group? Victoria's composure slipped. I presented it as one option for the company's future. One option that your father immediately rejected? He said it wasn't the right time. And 2 weeks after that rejection, you made the appointment for him to see Dr. Wells? I was worried about his health. Were you? Or were you building a medical case to support this conservatorship petition? That's not true. Amanda pulled out another document. Mrs. Miller, isn't it also true that Titan Energy Group offered you a position as Regional Operations Director with a starting salary of $400,000 annually if the sale went through? The courtroom went dead quiet. Victoria's face had gone pale. That was a preliminary discussion. A preliminary discussion worth $400,000 a year, which is significantly more than your current salary at Parker Oil. The offer was contingent on many factors, including your father no longer being in control of the company. I object to the implication. I'm not implying anything, Mrs. Miller. I'm asking directly. Didn't Titan make it clear that the sale was contingent on your father stepping aside? Victoria was quiet for a long moment. They wanted assurance about management continuity. Management continuity. And Charles Thompson, your attorney, how long have you known him? Charles is a family friend. How long, Mrs. Miller? We've known each other for about 8 years. Since your husband introduced you, isn't that right? Since they went to Stanford together. Charles was looking uncomfortable now, shuffling papers and whispering with his assistant. I suppose that's how we met, yes. And when did you first discuss this conservatorship idea with Mr. Thompson? I don't recall the exact date. Amanda pulled out yet another document. According to phone records, you had a 47-minute conversation with Charles Thompson on February 15th, just 3 days after your father rejected the Titan deal. What did you discuss for 47 minutes, Mrs. Miller? Victoria was squirming now. I don't remember the specifics. You don't remember. Just like you don't remember when you first discussed conservatorship. And you can't explain the $200,000 transfer. And you don't recall specific details about your father's alleged confusion. I've been under a lot of stress. I'm sure you have been. No further questions. Victoria walked back to her table on shaky legs. For the first time since this whole thing started, she looked like the little girl who used to come to me when she was in trouble. But I couldn't help her out of this trouble. She'd dug this hole herself. Judge Anderson announced a 15-minute recess. The moment she left the courtroom, Charles leaned over to Victoria and Anthony, whispering urgently. I could see Victoria's face getting more worried by the second. Amanda touched my arm. That went well. We've established serious doubts about their motives. But now it's our turn. You ready to tell your side? I patted the envelope in my jacket pocket. I've been ready for 8 months. Mr. Parker, I have to ask again. Why haven't you shown me everything in that envelope? I looked across the courtroom at my daughter, who was dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, while her husband and lawyer tried to coach her through what was coming next. Because I want everyone in this room to see what she really is, I said quietly. I want her to know that I know exactly what she's been doing. That's risky. If we present evidence the court hasn't seen, trust me, I said. I built an $18 million company by being careful and thorough. I know what I'm doing. Amanda looked like she wanted to argue, but Judge Anderson was already coming back. When court resumed, Amanda stood up with purpose. Your Honor, the defense calls Dr. Michelle Johnson. My primary care physician took the stand. Dr. Johnson had been treating me for 15 years. She knew me better than any psychiatrist who'd spent 50 minutes with me. Dr. Johnson, Amanda began, you've been Mr. Parker's physician for how long? 15 years. In all that time, have you observed any signs of cognitive decline or mental impairment? None whatsoever. Mr. Parker is sharp, articulate, and has an excellent memory for details. His last physical was 3 months ago, and he scored perfectly on all cognitive assessments. Has he mentioned any confusion or memory problems to you? Never. If anything, he remembers medical details better than most patients half his age. Charles tried to poke holes in her testimony during cross-examination, but Dr. Johnson was rock solid. Next, Amanda called Daniel Garcia, my CFO, for 15 years. Mr. Garcia, Amanda said, you work closely with Mr. Parker on financial decisions. Have you noticed any decline in his judgment or decision-making ability? Just the opposite, Daniel said firmly. Ben's as sharp as he's ever been. Every decision we've discussed has been well-reasoned and profitable. The only confusion I've seen is from Victoria when she questions decisions she doesn't understand. Can you elaborate on that? She'd challenge contracts or expenditures without understanding the context, like the Southwest Services contract she mentioned. That was a brilliant strategic move. They're a smaller company with lower overhead, and they've saved us $150,000 already. What about the $200,000 transfer she testified about? Daniel smiled. That was payment for specialized equipment that Victoria didn't know we'd ordered. Ben handles procurement for high-value items personally. It's been our practice for years. During cross-examination, Charles tried to suggest Daniel was biased because of his long relationship with me, but the damage was done. My CFO's testimony made Victoria look either incompetent or dishonest. Finally, Amanda called me to the stand. I walked up there feeling every one of my 59 years, but also feeling clearer than I had in months. This was where everything came out. Amanda took me through my background methodically. How I'd started Parker Oil in 1985 after getting out of the Army. How I'd built it from one truck to a fleet of 30 vehicles and 40 employees. How we'd grown from small city contracts to major corporate clients across Texas. "Mr. Parker," Amanda said, "your daughter has testified that you've been making poor decisions, transferring money without explanation, and showing signs of mental confusion. How do you respond to these allegations?" I looked directly at Victoria. "I've been investigating her for embezzlement for the past 8 months. The courtroom went dead silent. Victoria's face turned white as a sheet. "I'm sorry. Could you repeat that?" Amanda asked, though she'd heard me perfectly. "I said I've been investigating my daughter for stealing from Parker Oil Services." Victoria was shaking her head frantically. Charles was leaning over, whispering urgently to her, but she wasn't listening. She was staring at me like she'd seen a ghost. "Can you elaborate on that, Mr. Parker?" "Last February, I noticed some irregularities in our accounts. Small amounts at first, a few thousand here and there being transferred to numbered accounts that shouldn't exist. Then it got bigger. Much bigger." "What did you do?" "I hired a forensic accountant. Not the guy who testified earlier, but a real one. Quietly had him review everything going back 2 years. I also installed monitoring software on our servers that tracked all transactions and email communications." Charles was on his feet. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. If defendant had evidence of criminal wrongdoing, it should have been disclosed during discovery. Your client filed a petition claiming I'm mentally incompetent," I said, looking straight at Judge Anderson. "I'd like to present evidence proving not only that I'm perfectly competent, but that this entire proceeding is a fraud designed to prevent me from exposing my daughter's crimes." The courtroom erupted. People were talking. Charles was objecting, and Judge Anderson was banging her gavel like she was trying to drive nails. "Order! I will have order in my courtroom." She pointed directly at me. "Mr. Parker, do you have this evidence with you?" I pulled the manila envelope from my pocket. "Yes, Your Honor. Bank records, email exchanges, and security camera footage. All proving that Victoria has been systematically stealing from Parker Oil Services, and that she concocted this conservatorship scheme to prevent me from going to the police." Victoria found her voice. "That's not true, Daddy. You're confused. You don't understand." "Confused?" I opened the envelope and pulled out a printed email. "This is from you to Charles Thompson, dated 6 months ago. Quote, we need to move fast on the old man before he figures out what we're doing. If we can get him declared incompetent, I can close the Titan deal and bury all the evidence." The silence that followed was absolutely complete. You could have heard a pin drop in that courtroom. Charles Thompson's confident smile had completely vanished. His face went from normal color to pale, to gray, to green in about 10 seconds. He looked like he was going to be sick right there at the plaintiff's table. "That was taken out of context," he managed weakly, but his voice cracked on the words. "Really?" I pulled out more documents. "How about the bank records showing you've been receiving monthly payments from Victoria for the past year? Payments that started the exact same month the embezzlement began?" Judge Anderson's expression was thunderous. "Mr. Thompson, is this true?" Charles looked at Victoria, then at Anthony, then back at the judge. His mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, but no sound came out. "Mr. Parker," the judge said, "approach the bench with that evidence immediately." I walked up and handed her the entire envelope. She spent the next 10 minutes going through everything, her face getting darker with each page. Bank statements showing transfers to Victoria's personal accounts. Email chains between Victoria, Anthony, and Charles planning the whole scheme. Security footage of Victoria accessing files after hours and deleting records. But the piece de resistance was the recorded phone conversation between Victoria and a Titan Energy executive, discussing how much easier the acquisition would be once the old man was out of the picture. Finally, Judge Anderson looked up at Victoria and Charles. "You will both remain in this courtroom. Bailiff, contact the district attorney's office immediately. We're looking at fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy, and perjury charges." Victoria finally found her voice, but it came out as a whisper. "Daddy, please. I can explain everything. It's not what it looks like." I turned to face my daughter. The little girl I'd taught to drive in empty parking lots. The teenager who used to help me with paperwork at the office. The young woman I'd planned to leave everything to. This was the moment I'd been building toward for 8 months. The moment when I'd say the 3 words that would end it all. "Check the cameras." Those 3 simple words hit Charles Thompson like a physical blow. He went from pale green to absolutely gray because he knew exactly what was on those cameras. Victoria meeting with Titan executives in secret. Anthony deleting files from our computer servers. Charles himself accepting envelopes of cash payments. Most damning of all, footage of Victoria and Anthony in my office after hours, going through my personal files and copying documents they had no business seeing. "It's not what it looks like," Victoria said desperately, tears streaming down her face. "It's exactly what it looks like," I said quietly. "You got greedy, Victoria. You and Anthony thought you could steal my company, have me declared crazy, and get rich doing it. But you forgot something." "What?" she whispered. "You forgot that I built this company by being careful, by paying attention to details, by never trusting anyone completely." I paused, looking at my daughter who was crying openly now. "Not even family." "That's not fair, Daddy," Victoria sobbed. "I worked for that company my whole adult life. I deserved—" "You deserved what I chose to give you," I said firmly, "which would have been the whole thing eventually, if you'd been patient, if you'd been honest. But you couldn't wait, could you? You wanted it all right now." "Mr. Parker," Judge Anderson said, "I'm dismissing this petition immediately. Furthermore, I'm referring this entire matter to the district attorney for criminal prosecution. Mrs. Miller, you are hereby ordered to surrender your access to all Parker Oil Services accounts and facilities pending investigation." She banged her gavel with finality. "Court is adjourned." As security moved toward Victoria and Charles, my daughter turned to me one last time. "Was it worth it?" she asked through her tears. "Destroying your own family?" I looked at her for a long moment, this woman who had been my little princess, who I'd loved more than life itself. "I didn't destroy our family, Victoria," I said sadly. "You did that when you decided money was more important than honor.